Good morning and welcome to our regular midweek news conference. Before I begin, we could look at the papers today and we see that it is replete with evidence of where we have reached in terms of crime and criminality. Trinidad and Tobago, Daily Express, Malabar, innocent woman killed in wild shooting. Malabar, man escapes while girlfriend dies. Aranguez, pharmacist murdered in his car. Claxton Bay, businessman gunned down. Cuba, man walks to death after a phone call. Murder spree. And the Newsday we have woman killed. Front page. Beautiful. 5 murders in 12 hours. Take toll to 176. It was 176 as of today. At this time last year, it was 160 persons killed. Nobody is safe. And a Guardian, we have on the front page also, a woman hit by stray bullet among 5 killed in 12 hours. We reach, ladies and gentlemen. On my left is attorney at law, former Senator Sean Sobers, my esteemed friend, whom I respect a lot, and he will deal extensively with some of the legal matters with the recently held regional conference on crime. So while they have a talk shop, we have murders, 6 murders in 12 hours, 5 murders in 12 hours, a total of 176 citizens of Trinidad and Tobago dead. So he'll deal with the legal issues, and I'll speak first, and I will deal generally with that talk shop conference that was held by Prime Minister Keith Christopher Rowley to shift the responsibility for crime away from himself and a crime plan towards CARICOM colleagues. So when we look at that conference, what a colossal waste of time, money, effort, and talent. 2 days. This aptly describes the ill-timed, ill-conceived, costly, and well-choreographed distraction in the form of a 2-day regional symposium on crime. It was a poorly disguised attempt to regionalize what is essentially this Keith Rowley's administration ineptitude in dealing with our out-of-control crime. It is said, colleague, it is said that misery likes company. And Dr. Rowley succeeded. It was one thing. He succeeded in enjoining his CARICOM colleagues to commiserate with him in his abysmal crime-fighting record. He was searching Dr. Rowley was searching for credibility. What better way than a well-crafted photo op for Rowley and his merry band of failures to pass the buck? An opportunity to shake hands, smile for the cameras, and temporarily absolve himself and Hines. In accord with the Rowley doctrine, responsibility for solutions to escalating crime in Trinidad has been craftily shifted to CARICOM. Soon CARICOM will be blamed for not coming up with Trinidad and Tobago crime solutions. Just wait for it. Keith Rowley's strategy is to shift blame for Hines' incompetence. Just shift it. No matter where and to whom. So first it was blame Kamala. Right? That was the mantra for crime. Then next it was our historical past. We heard things like we have a history of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. So what we experienced, it is not new. Next in line was poor parenting. Then it was hyenas in our schools, followed by a woman making poor choices regarding spouses. In quick succession, Rowley's administration blamed music, family members for concealing criminals, then guns, and now we have assault rifles. And lately, this Rowley's esteemed disciple Hines, in whom Rowley is well pleased, tells us that crime results not from Hines's ineptitude, laziness, and lack of vision, but on Trinidad and Tobago's predisposition for pornography. Rowley has already laid the foundation for blaming the US gun lobby. So blame everybody. The US gun lobby is next in line. And you see why some people say that Trinidad and Tobago is not a real place. Rowley's management of the entire 2-day exercise shows his singular lack of diplomacy, class, and what we call brought-upsy. He invited the opposition to attend, but only the opening ceremony, and then classlessly announced to all of CARICOM that the opposition could stay if they are so minded. An invitation to the opposition to attend the closing ceremony came on the very morning of the event. It is as if they invite you, but they don't want you. A prime minister of class would have invited Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa to address the audience in order to demonstrate bipartisanship and his willingness to cross political divides, just as Mrs. Bisesa did when she was Prime Minister and graciously invited Dr. Rowley to accompany her to Nelson Mandela's funeral. Remember that? So class is class. Class is class, my comrade. It has to do with how you were brought up. You can't just acquire that in your late in life. Instead of being gracious, Dr. Rowley took the opportunity to politicize the event by being overtly partisan when he took aim at two eminently commendable crime-fighting solutions by the UNC. Firstly, the firing of Hines for gross incompetence, cluelessness, lack of vision, and abdication of ministerial responsibility. And Dr. Rowley's excuse for not firing Hines was pathetic. Essentially, he said firing won't make a difference. Couldn't get worse. One is left to wonder, what damaging secrets, if any, does Hines hold on Rowley, that he dare not fire him, even in the face of total dereliction of duty and a society that has gone wild west. Rowley also shamelessly took aim at the suggestion to divide the Ministry of National Security into two distinct portfolios. One, Home Affairs, two, Defense. No reasons were offered by Keith Rowley for not supporting the separation of portfolios, even as Singapore has reaped the benefits of so doing. And Hines struggles with a huge, wide-ranging portfolio that exceeds his abilities. So nothing new was offered. The 2-day work talk shop was a complete waste of time, money, and effort. It was a poorly disguised and costly attempt to buy time by Rowley and shift responsibility for home invasions and out-of-control murder rates to CARICOM. So for the next few months, those of us who the criminals allow to live, right? Those of us who the criminals allow to live will be told, hold stream, we're waiting on a CARICOM solutions, right? Don't worry about the murders, because we're waiting on CARICOM to come up with solutions. Buying time. Remember how Diyal Singh used Carfa? Right? Carfa to excuse his incompetence with handling COVID which resulted in thousands of deaths. Every sentence coming out of Diyal Singh's mouth had Kafa in it. Kafa was yesterday's panacea. Today it's CARICOM. But regionalizing the problem has not worked. It was tried before. Remember Impacts, based in Trinidad and Tobago? It is in Trinidad and Tobago. Was set up in 2006 by the same CARICOM to provide regional solutions to our region's crime-prone situation. There was a CARICOM approach to crime. Impact's remit was, and I quote, to manage CARICOM's action agenda on crime and security. End of quote. As well as, and I quote again, providing intelligence information to regional security agency personnel and other stakeholders, while providing strategic analysis of threat entities in the Caribbean region. So the Caribbean and CARICOM dealing with our crime issues, nothing new. So since 2010, Impacts has received $437 million in funding from the US alone. They got from other states, $500 million to provide CARICOM solutions to our crime problem. And Impacts has not impacted one iota on the regional crime. So Impacts was a CARICOM initiative. So what really is new coming out of this conference? 17 years later, we're back to square one, seeking regional solutions to Trinidad and Tobago crime problem. You see the nonsense that passes with governance in Trinidad and Tobago under Keith Rowley? So that is Rowley's latest crime plan. Regionalize the problem. Get all of them to come and say, we're doing this, we're doing the other. And hope that somehow he could buy time for the next 6 months. So while we are being killed and murdered, he'd say, wait, we're waiting on CARICOM. You see, they met and they're coming up with some solutions. We thank our CARICOM brothers and sisters for their presence. We know they mean well. The Prime Ministers, they meant well. We still hope that something will come out of this week's conference. But we will not hold our breath. We know it was merely an excuse, a talk shop, a PR exercise to buy time for a tired, weary, traumatized, scared Trinidad and Tobago population. So we asked the following questions about Rowley's two-day distraction. Ask some questions. 1. What did this two-day seminar cost taxpayers? 15 million? 20 million? 2. Could it not have been done at significantly reduced cost? 3. What are the measurable, and I deliberately use the word measurable, outputs of this public relations exercise? And what are the timelines for achieving these measurable objectives? You have none. 4. What will result from this meeting that could not have been achieved virtually, or by impact, or by a well-funded URI research study? 5. Can we expect a reduction in murders or home invasions or car thefts? And if so, when, Dr. Rowley? When? 6. How will this talk shop provide short and medium-term comfort to our families living in constant fear of home invasions, and even when they leave home? 7. Could the 15 million or so spent on this two-day seminar not pay for 4 scanners for our ports of entry, or 3 fire appliances for Rio Claro, Siparia, and Mayaro, or 1,000 CCTV cameras, or 900 printers, diaries, and receipt books for police stations, or body cams for frontline police officers? Is a misallocation of our scarce resources, Dr. Rowley. You cannot be allowed to waste money on grandiose PR nonsense. 8. How will this help us with the under-resourced DPP office or the underfunded judiciary? How did that? I listened in horror last evening, and my colleague, Attorney Sean Sobers, will go in more detail on this matter. I listened in horror that last evening at statements made by the DPP in a joint select committee. It was shameful, the level of deprivation and abuse suffered by that supposedly independent institution. How did this two-day seminar PR exercise help the beleaguered DPP office? 9. How will this conference help our Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard to be more professional in manning our porous borders? Will it help them to realize that Staubles Bay is not the entire coastline of Trinidad and Tobago? A geography lesson would have been more productive than that nonsense at the Hyatt. 10. How will a forensic science regional forensic science capability help when the proposed expensive forensic science center due in 2025 with Chinese help will most likely, if completed, be understaffed, poorly maintained, and unaccredited? 11. Why blame the US for proliferation of guns in Trinidad and Tobago when our borders remain porous, allowing guns, ammunition, drugs, human traffickers, and God knows what else to enter Trinidad and Tobago without let or hindrance? My colleague will talk about the question of taking the US government to court, notwithstanding a US judicial system, Republican control of the US Congress, and even the Supreme Court that have favored the US citizens' right to bear arms. My colleague will deal with that. All I ask is not one black cent of Trinidad and Tobago taxpayers' dollars must be wasted on that futile exercise. 13. How will a regional approach to crime succeed while this PNM administration is in office, when questions remain unanswered about the funding of Balize House and our commissioner of police, perhaps mindful about the funding of Balize, perhaps mindful that Rowley has the power to extend her contract next month, appears powerless to stand up like a man and ask Keith Christopher Rowley for the list of Balize House donors. So we call on Dr. Rowley once again to reveal the list of donors to Balize House. We call on all donors who may be laundering money through Balize House or those trying to get contracts, padded contracts, to feed off the government trough, that your day of reckoning is going to come as sure as night followed day. Our political leaders already said a commission of inquiry is going to be held. I know donors who have nothing to fear, legitimate donors, no problem. But if we see contracts being given to donors as a payment for for making donations, then there is going to be a problem. In our view, you could have your international conference, but Balize House will remain a living symbol of opulence, decadence, profligacy, and corruption. 14. How can we expect to feel safe and secure when clueless Hines enjoys the full confidence of his boss, Keith Christopher Rowley? Can Kerry come solve that? And if so, tell me how. 15. How can we believe Rowley is serious about tackling crime when, as he sat while he was sitting at the Hyatt for 2 days, listening to Timone's strategies, while during those said 2 days, and a Wranglers businessman was shot, killed. A man was gunned down at a car wash in Cuba. A primary school and a Presbyterian church were broken into. Human remains were found in Arima. A 35-year-old woman was shot and killed in her own home with a stray bullet in Arima. A 27-year-old woman was shot and killed in a car in Arima. A woman was shot dead and 5 others wounded, including Embarrassing. It is a joke. Our institutions are all collapsing before our very eyes. We have citizens wearing a TTPS jacket while liming on the street, like it's just another piece of clothing. This is not right. How could that exist in a real country? But Heinz tells us he cannot create a crime plan because it's not his job. The government has always been long on excuses and platitudes, short on actionable, workable, measurable plans. They love to talk. But when it comes time for action, nothing. We get a regional talk show. More talk. They go kill we with talk. Quote, unquote. They go kill we with talk. They do not know how to operationalize ideas. CARICOM has a well-known implementation deficit. The talk shop recommended a ban on assault weapons. According to clueless Cleet Rowley, this will require legislation that needs opposition support. You will deal with that in more detail. But this is utter rubbish because in Trinidad and Tobago, the Commissioner of Police who issues the firearm licenses, and no civilian has been issued a FUL for any assault weapon by any Commissioner of Police. It is essentially already banned in Trinidad and Tobago for civilians, especially as the law already deems assault rifles prohibited weapons. My colleague will go into that in more detail. So if assault weapons end up in crime, it is because of our porous borders and or leakage from our protective services. So we all know the solutions to crime. It's through securing our borders, scanners at our ports, radars that can detect small wooden vessels, and effective discipline in our armed services. Something is rotten in that organization that is supposed to be the epitome of discipline in Trinidad and Tobago. So it is not more legislation, Dr. Rowley. We all know the solutions. They have been listed in the Ryan report, the Watkins report, the Scott Drug report, the Sabga and Jones reports, and countless others. Solutions exist. You could go in any rum shop in Trinidad and get the solutions. You don't have to hold a 2-day expensive wine and dine and eat shrimps, as the people say in the country. They eat shrimps to come up with solutions that we already know. The solution to crime are already known. Do we need anyone to tell us that TTPS officers must turn on their body cams while on duty? We don't need CARICOM to tell us that. Why did they hold a 2-day symposium to tell us the same things we have known since Dr. Rowley was in Pampas? I now come to an abused child becomes a dangerous adult. CARICOM chairman and Bahamas' Prime Minister, Philip Davis, during his opening remarks at the CARICOM Crime Conference, quoted Bahamian psychiatrist Dr. David Allen, who said, quote, an abused child becomes a dangerous adult. That's right. But God alone knows how Rowley and his band of PNM failures were able to sit and listen with a straight face, knowing fully well that they have all but turned a blind eye to the thousands of cases of abused children in Trinidad and Tobago, some of them under the watch of the state institutions. At the Regional Crime Symposium, Social Development Minister Donna Cox was very articulate when she highlighted the egregious failure of this PNM administration when she gives statistics for August 2017 to July 2022. Here's statistics. 1,811 children before the courts in criminal matters. 1,405 cases were filed for children in need of supervision. 27,095 cases filed for domestic violence. The Children's Authority indicated between 2017 and 2022, 5,340 reports of child neglect, 5,267 reports of sexual abuse, and 3,530 reports of physical abuse. But who did Minister Cox blame? Social media? and poor parenting. Where is the concrete action? We're not talking fancy obfuscatory nonsense. Where is the concrete action on the Judith Jones and Sabga reports? No ban on assault weapons could help that situation. No CARICOM symposium can solve these problems. It is a crisis of an implementation deficit by CARICOM on one hand and by Trinidad and Tobago on the other. For the year 2022 to 23 academic year, hear what is happening in the real country of Trinidad and Tobago. 5,362 students were suspended from secondary school. 463 primary school pupils were suspended, including one child for leadership of a gang. Imagine a child under 12 suspended for leading a gang. What madness is this? Where we reach? Do we need CARICOM to tell us what needs to be done? Almost 10,000 cases of domestic violence reported to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service since 2018. 175 lives lost to domestic violence. 504 lives were lost to suicide. All of these statistics, Minister Cox relayed with a straight face at the conference. Over $40 billion, $40 billion spent on social services by this administration. In the past 7 years. Yet our social services have been clearly failing to help the poor, the vulnerable, at-risk citizens to keep their heads above water long enough to catch themselves and survive on their own without a life of crime. So in conclusion, every single citizen of Trinidad and all has experienced, like Kamla Prasad Bisesa, who has promised to make home invasions a specific criminal offense with a penalty of 25 years in jail. But you want to bet something? Dr. Rowley will never ever bring that to Parliament. Give people who are under attack in their homes the ability to use force to protect themselves via stand your ground laws. If you cannot stand your ground in your own home in Trinidad and Tobago in 2023, your very castle, then heaven help us all. They break in, they beat us, they rape our wives, our children, and we are supposed to continue and live happily ever after under Rowley and Hines. Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa also proposed increasing the sentences for larceny, burglary, serious assault, and unlawful entry to homes and businesses. These ideas have merit, but narcissistic, clueless, self-important Hines and Rowley would rather condescend and hurl insults at the opposition rather than meaningfully engage. When we were in office, we had countless measures that worked. We had the National Operations Center as the backbone of intelligence gathering. We had a rapid response unit where police patrols were done 24/7 basis. We had community comfort patrols as a crime prevent deterrent, especially against home invasions. Community comfort patrols. We established 13 surveillance bays on the Uriah Butler and Solomon Hochoy Highway. We increased the number of CCTVs throughout Trinidad and Tobago. We established the National Transnational Organization Crime Unit. We had training of crime scene investigators. We passed and implemented numerous anti-crime legislation, including the Trafficking in Persons Bill, which led to us getting an upgrade in the U.S. Trafficking in Human Persons Report. Under Dr. Rowley, we are now downgraded, Tier 2 watch list. But Rowley would rather watch Trinidad and Tobago burn than admit that the UNC has a good idea. He'd rather they suffer, denigrate us, insult us rather than say, well, there's a good idea among the 6 or 7, and I will use that in the interest of the citizen and of Trinidad and Tobago. He'd rather watch Trinidad and Tobago burn than admit the UNC has a good idea. Such is the measure of the boy. I call on Dr. Rowley, humble yourself. Seek ye first the people's interests. Recognize that you do not have all the answers. Talk less and listen more. Treat the opposition with respect and meaningfully engage us. We will help you come up with smart crime fighting strategies. But first, Dr. Rowley, you must shake off the spell put on you by Fitzgerald Hines and fire him yesterday. Nothing but obia or long COVID or early onset Alzheimer can make Prime Minister Rowley believe that Fitzgerald Ethelbert Hines is doing an exemplary and performance-driven job as Minister of National Security. It has to be obia. The 2-day symposium was a colossal waste of time, money, effort, and talent in our fight against crime in Trinidad and Tobago. And Dr. Rowley must wake up, smell the coffee, and come up with workable plans and not PR distractions. Thank you, and I now hand you over to my esteemed colleague, former Senator Sean Sobers.
Thank you, MP Charles, for giving us that canvas with respect to issues coming out of the 2-day symposium on gun violence and crime held at the Hyatt Regency. It is my intention this morning to drill down on some specific issues that actually did in fact come out from that crime symposium. But it would be remiss of me to sit here this morning and not be properly well disturbed by the front page of all of the dailies, which demonstrate a clear response, if we can call it that, by the criminal elements within this country to that 2-day crime symposium. That within a couple of hours or days subsequent to that symposium being held, you have scenes where you have 5 murders taking place in 12 hours, as MP Charles would have indicated, that a murder toll would have jumped to 176 Trinbagonian citizens losing their lives. And when you look at the persons who are being affected by crime and criminality within this country, you recognize that it is a landscape of persons within Trinidad and Tobago. No one is being spared, and that is why, as a responsible opposition, it is important for us to come and provide you, Trinidad and Tobago, with the relevant information tethered to the ongoings and the ill happenings of this particular administration. Coming out from the symposium that would have been held at the Hyatt Regency, CARICOM would have agreed upon some 15-point crime plans or action plans that they intended to implement to arrest the crime situation within the Caribbean region. Some of them could be considered to be commendable, but we as a responsible opposition, again, in collaboration with MP Charles, we call upon quick implementation of these plans so that the Caribbean region as a whole could actually see some of these plans come to fruition and possibly see the efficacy of it redound to the benefit of all citizens within the Caribbean region. However, in particular, there have been about 3 of those plans that has piqued public interest and discourse within the last 24 to 48 hours. One of those plans that were announced within the symposium, as MP Charles alluded to, would have been this ban on assault weapons. In particular, the plan indicates, or the point indicates, that a ban on assault weapons in the region, except for security forces and sporting competitions. In Trinidad and Tobago in particular, the difficulty with such a plan being enacted is that it is already law. We already have legislation within the parameters of the Firearms Act that bans assault weapons from being given to the civilian population. Essentially, assault weapons under the Act are covered under prohibited weapons, and prohibited weapons are not able to be legally issued by any commissioner of police. An assault weapon or an automatic weapon or a prohibited weapon is essentially a weapon. Once the trigger is depressed, the weapon can fire several rounds under a minute, which can cause immense carnage to an unsuspecting population. These illegal weapons, and they are in this country. Another issue that was raised by CARICOM or by the committee would have been drafting and issuing of a missive or a correspondence to Washington asking for assistance in the war against gun violence. We have to understand and appreciate, whilst we sit here in Trinidad and Tobago and within the Caribbean region, the United States, Washington, D.C., the Biden administration is already wrestling with issues with respect to gun violence within their cities, within their schools, within their malls, within their banks, within their public places and spaces. And the most that they have done under an executive order by President Biden would have been to issue an executive order that increases background checks and waiting times for persons to procure firearms from gun manufacturers or gun stores within the US. We also have to equally appreciate that the only authority that deals with gun manufacturing and any issues related to firearms within America is the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms Division. It is a federal agency that spans the entire length and breadth of the United States. And so I don't understand, or I cannot grasp what would ever come out of a correspondence going to Washington calling upon the US and its president to do what? To do more than he has already done? He is already hamstrung by the fact that the right to bear arms is a constitutional right within their Bill of Rights within the United States. Are we then asking the United States of America to erode the rights of their citizens and to remove their Second Amendment because guns and other things, illegal things, are flowing within the borders of the Caribbean region, within Trinidad and Tobago? Where's the logic in such a correspondence being issued? What are we actually asking the US to do? Is it the position of Trinidad and Tobago and its Prime Minister and its government and administration to akin writing a correspondence to Washington similarly when there was an issue with respect to persons smoking cigarettes and cigarette advertisements were seen to be cool and hip, and so persons lobbied cigarette companies to place on their boxes images of persons with throat cancer? Are we asking the US government to place on the boxes of guns when they are being shipped legally and manufactured legally in the US images of persons being maimed and gunned down? What is the real ethos and efficacy of sending that correspondence? Where is it tethered to some type of logic that persons within this country who are sensible can find it palatable to adopt such a course of action? And another issue as well too, or action point that was agreed upon, was this joining of certain CARICOM nations with Mexico in an appeal against US gun manufacturers. Now, in 2023, there was a case that was filed by Mexico, and the Prime Minister of this country commented on that case, and he indicated lucidly, Mexico has approached CARICOM asking us, independent sovereign states with the same problem, to join the fight, to test in the courts of America, to hold the manufacturers and distributors of handguns and assault weapons into our country, to hold them responsible for the mayhem that they have unleashed on our societies. And Rowley indicated we have to join that fight. Rowley said America had passed laws to prevent gun owners from being sued, adding those who are making those guns, listen to this carefully, adding those who are making those guns, knowing where they are going and what they could do, have been insulated from lawsuits. How could a gun manufacturer somewhere quite in the US making a gun, a pistol, or an assault weapon, or whatever it is, will absolutely know where the gun is going to end up, save and except for when he operates within the parameters of the law in the US with respect to sales and background checks to persons who are entitled to bear arms in the US? Is the Prime Minister basically indicating to persons within this country and CARICOM at large that US gun manufacturers are clairvoyant, that they are psychics, that all of them, whilst they're creating guns, have a crystal ball that will tell them that this particular firearm is going to end up in the hands of some errant or criminal element who is going to utilize that to wreak carnage on citizens within the Caribbean? Tethered to that, we must then ask ourselves, what is the purpose of joining Mexico in this lawsuit? What came out of that initial lawsuit that would have been filed in the first instance court in the US by Mexico alone? The judge in that court in the first instance indicated that US law under the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act shields gun makers from lawsuits over the harm solely caused by the criminal or unlawful misuse of firearm products by others when the product functions as designed and intended. That is what the US court would have indicated. That is what they would have said. So joining Mexico in initiating an appeal now to a law that exists that protects gun manufacturers in the United States is a moot point as well too. And we have to ask ourselves, what resources, and B. Charles would have spoken about that, resources with respect to the symposium, money spent and wasted on the symposium. What resources is Trinidad and Tobago going to lend to Mexico and others with respect to this lawsuit that is bound to fail when it comes up in the appellate court? What are we intending to do with respect to that application? What do we expect to achieve? We have to appreciate that with respect to what occurs in Mexico, it is in fact quite similar in Trinidad and Tobago. You have an issue of guns and money leaving the US and finding itself into Mexico to be utilized for criminal activity. And then you have an issue of drugs and other prohibited items leaving Mexico and entering the US. That is what the United States is grappling with currently right now with Mexico. Where does Trinidad and Tobago and CARICOM by extension factor into such a fight in the US courts? What do we hope to achieve? What should have come out from that symposium, what we expected as a responsible opposition, would have been discussions centered around border security and border management. Because that is the cause of the problems with respect to gun violence within Trinidad and Tobago. Our borders are too porous. And we as a responsible opposition under the astute leadership of Mrs. Prasad Bisasa has been saying that for several years now. There needs to be a realistic plan put in place to ensure that our borders are secure. A plan that could even go as far as stretching to assist other Caribbean nations as well too. We spoke about that at length. Mrs. Prasad Bisasa indicated there needs to be interdiction to protect our borders, air, sea and land. You have several layers of protection that can be placed within our borders. The interceptors, the go fast boats that were purchased by the People's Partnership Administration, there was a purpose in terms of the purchasing of those assets, having them out there because the boats that are coming into Trinidad and Tobago from Venezuela and elsewhere, they are also go fast boats. So purchasing a large offshore patrol vessel that does not have the capability to chase these boats made absolutely no sense. Hence the reason why we complained about the purchase of the hostile patrol vessels. When you have go-fast boats, the interceptors, being able to chase these boats down as they come into the country, bringing in guns, drugs, and bodies, you could try to stop them when they attempt to breach the borders, the maritime borders. And in the event that they breach the corral that would be formed by the interceptors, you would have air vessels now, helicopters and whatnot, that would be able to tell the persons on the ground, the land interdiction team on the ground, on the beaches, listen, the boat has breached and it has berthed in this particular sector. You need to send cars down there, be it customs or police or immigration or what have you, to go down there, the regiment, to arrest those persons. A cohesive plan of different security apparatuses working together to secure our borders. That is what we require. And in the event that there's a breach on land as well too, you have intelligence-driven interdiction. Because there's a finite amount of persons within this country who associate with these criminal elements with respect to the bringing in of the guns and the bringing in of the drugs and the bringing in of the bodies, where these persons are stashed in safe houses until they can be moved throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. And if we have the intelligence where these safe houses are, we can intercept them before they are moved throughout Trinidad and Tobago. That is what is required. But what do we have existing now in Trinidad and Tobago? Half of those interceptors, if not all of those interceptors, are packed up in Stobbles Bay because they were not maintained. Despite the calls and the cry and the hue of the persons within the Coast Guard and outside of the Coast Guard for maintenance of those interceptors. What has gone on with our air assets? A couple of weeks ago, the Air Guard persons were complaining that all of those air assets were grounded because they were not being maintained. So they can't be utilized in the fight against criminal activity within this country. These are the issues that we have plaguing. That is what it should have been discussed at that crime symposium, and solutions, whether it be a loan or whatever, procured to maintain and fix those assets to get them back out there in the fight against crime. What is the status of scanners in the event that things breach our legal ports of entry? Because we dealt with illegal ports. What about our legal ports? At a joint select committee last year, the entire country was flabbergasted and shocked, appalled that there are no working scanners within this country at our legal ports of entry to be able to scan containers coming in from the US with respect to guns and other things. These are the things that we call upon the administration to treat with, that the crime symposium, 2 days in Hyatt, they should have dealt with. Strengthening of relationships with the same Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms Division. Last year, Commissioner Jacobs, commendably, he spoke about a relationship that was being germinated with them. That when we have guns that are seized here in Trinidad and Tobago, the guns would have serial numbers. We could contact the ATF and let them know, listen, this gun has ended up within Trinidad and Tobago. It was utilizing the commission of an illegal offense. And we want to know who sent this gun to Trinidad, whether the gun was procured legally or not, and whether it was illegally exported from the US. And we want those persons within the US to be held accountable. And based upon such a relationship, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, persons would have been held, they would have been prosecuted, and they would have pled guilty, and they are now serving time in the US. Those are actionable, measurable options and solutions that would have a proper dent against gun violence within Trinidad and Tobago. And that is what we expect from the crime symposium, or what we would have expected from the crime symposium. And we have to also appreciate that when all of those things come into play, when they mesh together and persons are actually arrested, they face their day in court. Justice is swift. And when they find themselves in a prison, we ensure that a jail is a jail is a jail is a jail. It is not the Hilton. It is not Hyatt. You're not inside a jail cell and calling hits on people outside. And it brings us down to also consider the question about the jammers within the prison. The same unpatriotic UNC that do assist the government in passing legislation. We assisted them in passing legislation to protect members of the security services and individuals outside by increasing penalties for persons who would call hits from the prison. Where are the jammers with respect to those persons within the prison who are calling hits on individuals outside? The prisons commissioner last year indicated that he is supposed to know that they are not in existence. He's never seen them. So he doesn't know anything about any jammers. All of these things, these issues, should have been discussed at that crime symposium. Persons would have developed and engendered confidence in what would have come out from that crime symposium. So the response by the criminal elements 2 days after wouldn't be all of this nonsense that you're seeing on the dailies. 5 people being killed after you spend millions of dollars to fet, wine and dance, a set of people to come down here and nothing palatable coming out from that crime symposium that could actually have an effect on gun violence within this country and the Caribbean region. We call upon the government, as we have done in the past and will continue to do until we take office, because we will, to address these very real concerns, these low-hanging fruit solutions that we have proffered to you. Take them on board, because the only way you're going to see a reduction in gun violence within this country is when, at first, in terms of your paramount concern, you treat with our porous borders, so you deal with border security and border management. And we are willing and more than able to assist in giving further solutions and passing proper legislation that will bring about that ease that citizens within this country are now begging for. If there are any questions, MP Charles and I would be open to take them from any members of the media present. Oh, yeah.
One of the things that struck me is the, if I'm using the right word, a conflation of two issues at the moment regarding guns. Like, at the moment you have desperate and frightened people genuinely wanting to defend themselves. But parallel to that is this whole long, big issue of the debate of guns in the USA, which they can't even figure out. But I can see the logic of wanting to, go as close as you can to the source of guns. Like, instead of trying, every border is porous. The Europeans having huge issues and challenges with their borders. We have, there'll always be porous borders. So I can understand the logic of wanting to trace back to go to as close to the source of where guns are coming from. In America, there's such a lot of gray areas in that they are manufactured legitimately and respectably, but the trade fairs is where the gray areas are. There are a lot of people, like, if you say, well, this is excess from my collection, you can sell without background checks to anybody. There's a lot of many gray areas. So where the so-called legal guns then pass into illegal hands, and then they're transported to the urban areas. So you have the countryside where it's a tradition and you're the frontiersman and the pioneering spirit, defend your family, but then it gets into the urban area. It's such a mess. So I could understand Mexico's initiative to try to get at this whole. In fact, they've even coined, I was reading an article yesterday, they've even coined the term for it. They call it the Iron River, an iron river of guns flowing from US south. Woods to Mexico, and then there'll be some overspill. So that's kind of an observation, but I think my question, well, I have so many ways to handle the questions. Like, how do we have this debate held, Phil? Because it's, it just ends up like a shouting match of opposition government, and one might accuse a government of politicizing things using a symposium, and also one might accuse the UNC of saying, look, there's, one might, I'm not judging, but, wanting to defend himself, but not having a free-for-all, and in fact buying in to the current really free-for-all that's happening in the US, all these gray areas, and because we need to, our history is not US history.
Correct, yeah.
Of the frontiersman, the man up in the mountain. Even Condoleezza Rice once said that African Americans heavily relied on the right to bear arms in the South, where she grew up, when being attacked by the Ku Klux Klan members. So their history is so different, and you could not respond, or she's Condoleezza Rice said you could not make a phone call to Birmingham, Alabama police station and expect somebody to come out to save you from the, the racial attacks and so on. So our history, we need to craft like unique solutions for us. I'm just hoping that a forum could be, arrived at, and what your thoughts are, instead of it just becoming a slanging match and, so I don't know if you had any thoughts on those two issues.
So essentially, our difficulty with respect to joining Mexico or any Caribbean or any country, as a matter of fact, filing a lawsuit against U.S. gun manufacturers is rooted in the fact that there is a law that allows gun manufacturers the leeway that they have to manufacture the guns and not be responsible for the end user utilizing the thing in a criminal way. You are correct, Sean, in saying that their history with respect to it being tethered to their Second Amendment right to bear arms is totally different from ours within the Caribbean. They would have had that amendment or that particular right because of the prairies that they live in, the ability for the state not being able to protect individuals within the U.S. in the way in which they would like to. And then ultimately, the amendment would have come about subsequent to the revolution, wherein Americans were saying, listen, apart from being able to protect ourselves from attacks within, we should also be able to protect ourselves from attacks outside of the U.S. so that if there's an invading force, we are able now to protect and repel against those invading forces.
It was actually against tyranny, from what I understood, that individuals at a local level could stand up against any tyranny that such as they would have been from European. I think that
correct,
was
which is the UK, right? England at the point in time. Right. Correct, that's what I was referring to. However, our position as an opposition is saying, listen, there are other ways that you could treat with the situation. Exploring bilateral relationships with the Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms Division is one of those ways. Because when the firearm actually reaches Trinidad and Tobago, is seized subsequent to the commission of an offense, you can then report to the ATF this gun was utilized in the commission of an offense, and we want to find out how this gun found its way into Trinidad and Tobago. And if it is the gun was procured in an illegal manner within the US, or even procured legally in the US, but exported illegally, then the individual who has done so should face some type of penalty. If there is no relationship with CARICOM, Trinidad and Tobago or otherwise, with the ATF, and some type of punishment being meted out to that individual who exported that firearm illegally to Trinidad and Tobago, and that firearm has been utilized to commit a crime within Trinidad, within Jamaica, within Mexico, or elsewhere, then we will be going nowhere. Let us further that relationship with the ATF and other federal agencies within the US, so that persons who engage in that type of trade, exporting firearms illegally and finding themselves within Trinidad and Tobago and elsewhere, that they are also held accountable. And that may very well deter other individuals from embarking upon such actions.
I also think that it has to do with the fact that we need a discussion on the real issues. Because the question arises, how, as my colleague said, the judicial system in the United States is Republican in terms of the Supreme Court is now wedded to protection of the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. So you are going into a system, hopefully not spending taxpayers' money in Trinidad, to go so that will eventually end up in a Supreme Court, which is, given its present composition, 9 out of 10 times likely to vote to come down in favor of the gun manufacturers. This is notwithstanding the fact, as my colleague said, that there are laws protecting the gun manufacturers. So do we enter into an exercise that is one of utility? Unless you could explain that, yes, we are going in, notwithstanding decisions, notwithstanding the law, notwithstanding the prejudices of the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, we are going in because we expect to achieve A, B, and C. That has never happened. We would welcome that discussion.
I mean, one of the, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. If you can't win as the laws are currently drafted, if the law is a law, maybe there could be a lobby of the two houses of Congress to amend laws, because, to amend that law that gives an unlimited.
Have you ever listened to the Republican spokesperson when the executive order by President Biden, he has to go that way because it's dead on arrival when it arrives on Congress. They are not prepared to even consider background checks. They're not prepared to do any because they see it as a slippery slope. We give up on background checks and the next thing we lose our guns. And so how are you, and this is what the government has to explain to us, how are you, notwithstanding that formidable opposition to any incursion on the right to bear arms in the United States, how is little Trinidad and Tobago, how is little CARICOM able to breach that wall in order to get the Congress, who tell you point blank, we are not going to discuss anything that has to do with breaching the right to bear arms. So that is the question. You do not go into something that you're going to lose legally, or you can't lobby, as you were suggesting rightly. You cannot lobby. Do we have the power to lobby to get the United States to change its cultural addiction to guns? And that is the bouncing ahead against a wall that doesn't make sense to many of us. That requires the government to explain their strategies.
Any thought on how much, like the thing, any update on the business owners in Trinidad, the call for business owners to have guns? Would it be business owners, or would that be a wider category? Or what would the UNC position be? If you just want to recap briefly.
Well, in any event, there are parameters that are currently available that persons have to meet for them in terms of making an application to procure firearms legally within this country. The system is not the best system. It is replete with certain problems, and it is a UNC's administration policy that one of the things we would do is to ensure that those issues that are within the system in and of itself are eroded and stamped out as quickly as possible. Not to say that it would be extremely easy for anybody to walk up the street and make an application and procure a firearm, but those are most deserving of the guns, and they meet the criteria that they will in fact be able to procure same subsequent to going through the procedure in and of itself.
Just a question. Well, this is for both of you. Do you think that the focus on taking U.S. gun manufacturers to court or to seeking legal action against them, is this really sort of CARICOM leaders abdicating their responsibility, which they have to keep to keep their respective countries safe? Basically, is the Prime Minister passing the buck then of gun crime onto the United States?
Well, we have talked about the strategy of the Keith Rowley administration to pass the buck. Look for somebody else to pass the excuse. Whether it's Kamala Prasad-Bissessar in the beginning, whether it's spouses we select, whether it is pornography, and now it's the United States government. Knowing full well the difficulty of having a positive impact on that initiative. So therefore, we see it as the primary responsibility, and I think my colleague mentioned, of the Trinidad and Tobago government is to protect and provide for the safety and security of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We have already seen in various statements, like, it is not my responsibility to keep citizens safe and so on. We do not have a current plan. That's not we've seen an abdication of responsibility, and it is frightening that, and you could almost see it from hyenas to the U.S. gun lobby. We think that this is just an indication that they are abdicating their responsibilities and not doing the things like protecting our borders and all the joint actions, interagency, actions that are required to protect the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago.
And Charles, also, apart from the recent trend in home invasions and gun crime and so on, a lot of business owners are complaining about extortion rackets being run. Do you think that this is something that the police should sort of focus on?
I cannot understand why that has not been dealt with. The question of extortion. And you know what? Not only businessmen, you have in primary schools, you have bullies taxing other pupils with respect taxing them for lunch, etc. Because it is a culture shift that if we do not take note of an arrest, it's going to overcome us. Because I cannot understand why an initiative has not been developed with respect to the Chinese businessmen in particular, because they, for all kinds of reasons, do not access the banking sector as other businessmen. So they tend to keep the money at home. I don't want to give out these details in that. So therefore, to criminals know if they attack the Chinese businessmen, they're more than not likely to have money hoarded somewhere. Why can't the police now? Do you have to wait? If you want, and this is why the police of yesterday, that Bagalayan and these fellas, Bagalayan stopped me twice to find out who I am in St. Madeleine. So he was doing intelligence work. They had sting operations. If you know Chinese, why we can't assign 20 police officers to keep an eye, monitor? Why can't we not have the SSA tapping into the phones of known gang leaders to try and anticipate? Because what happens if we have a reactive situation in Trinidad? So when you raise the question of businessmen being attacked, we know that. We need a focused group of police officers with intelligence and common sense to know that you sit and wait, monitor, drive wrong, do things like you press a button and something rings in the police station and you know directly what is happening. You could have, like how we have neighborhood watch groups, we could have business watch groups, so they link with each other, panic buttons, etc. Why is the TTPS sitting down and waiting for things to happen? When, okay, you see somebody driving a car and he has drugs and you hold him and you arrest him, but he is only the driver. He is the big boy who employs him. You hold this fellow and you try to find out the network. So you would hear somebody, we hold so many guns and we arrested this person for driving with drugs. Full stop. As if there is no linkage back and linkage forward to those who are exporting the crimes. My other concern is the big boys, the Mr. Big. Bringing the jobs. The little boys cannot afford the 100 million US or the 10 million to hand to the Colombian drug lords. So how many of them exist can you afford to bring in a load of 2 million US drugs? You cannot. None of us can. They're only about, I would say, less than 0.5%, for half of 1% of Trinidad and Tobago. We have a SSA with billions of dollars over the past decade. And monitor these phones and find out this person is calling that person for drugs and whatnot. And you set up a sting operation to where is the intelligence? As far as I'm concerned, we're wasting money with the SSA. Shut it down.
Select Committee of National Security, and he had a very startling revelation in which he said, which he heavily implied, that a former Attorney General, a training session that he had intended to have with his staff. How do you respond to that?
Well, I as well had a look at some aspects of the Joint Select Committee and also took a read of excerpts of the Joint Select Committee. I commend Mr. Gaspard of Senior Counsel for showing up at the Joint Select Committee and providing the public with information related to issues plaguing his office, not only as it pertains to staff shortages, but from possible interference from the government in the form of the Attorney General. Maybe not this particular Attorney General, but the Attorney General. He didn't clarify who the person was. But what I took particular note of would have been some questions and information that Senator Lutch-Medial, being a member of the Joint Select Committee, would have put to Mr. Gaspard, of which he agreed with. And then there was a bit of a discourse between the DPP and the chair of the Joint Select Committee, which would have been Mr. Scotland. And permit me if I do, you have the situation where the DPP is saying, but the AG has no place in the executive decision-making of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Mr. Scotland then retorts by saying, are you saying that there is an intervention by the Office of the AG in the decision-making process of the DPP? The DPP then indicates, I am not saying that there are interventions by the AG. Put the incumbent aside, bearing in mind my institutional memory, there have been attempts at interference in the DPP's office, and I'm speaking from my own knowledge. Right? Mr. Scotland then says, and Director, those attempts that you are speaking about, have you actioned them? Have you written about them? Have you brought them to anyone's attention? And the DPP's response is, I have. I have. As a member of the opposition, I would humbly call upon Mr. Gaspard to indicate and to share with the public what actions were taken. If there were letters written, release the letters. Let the public see and have an appreciation of the ills and the problems that he is facing, that he is plagued with at the DPP's office. It is high time that whatever issues that have been plaguing the DPP's office, whatever interference that has been taking place at the DPP's office, it is high time that those things become transparent and that the public has full knowledge of that information. Because if there is any wrongdoing on the part of any member of the government with respect to its interaction with the DPP's office, I think the public should be made aware and that person or persons should be held accountable.
I think that's all the questions we have.
Well, we have come to the end of the news conference. We wish to thank you, the viewing audience, the members of the media who have been here. Before we close, I want to take this opportunity to remind viewers of our Monday night forum in Princestown this Monday.
Yeah.
It will be at Sancho Road, New Grant. And of course, the main speaker will be our political leader, Mrs. Kamala Pasal-Bisesa. So we will see you there. Thanks for your attention as the opposition attempts to highlight the issues of the day and to give you, to hold the government to account and to give you our perspective on matters of importance. I thank you.